one of the dilemmas we have in the peacemaking industry, if you will, is that our working ethic has been you can go anywhere under almost any conditions to talk with a group that's interested and serious about how do you get to the peace table. This decision clearly closes out that option. One of the things that we had hoped in this argument before the court was to say that there are First Amendment issues of free speech in this dialogue, maybe even potentially in training groups how to make concessions and how to come into the mainstream that would not be seen as material support. But it's been classified now as material support as if speech was a fungible resource. And that's real damaging to our work in Colombia and in various other places where you have a large number of the contestants already designated on a terrorist list. There's a kind of belief here in the Roberts ruling, not stated, but between the lines, that essentially says that groups that use violence are unredeemable, and there's no sense in talking with them. You know, there's a recent 2009 RAND Corporation study on insurgencies and terrorist groups that shows that 70% of the time these insurgencies end when groups go mainstream. Well, peace groups are the groups that train people how to go mainstream, how to turn in the weapons, how to engage in a dialogue that will be effective. We had a situation over most of this decade where folks like Secretary Rice and others articulated a strategy that says unless a group comes in and surrenders, they're not legitimate to be at the table talking about peace. I had a friend say the other night that you peace groups are naive in thinking that the court would rule it all in your favor. I don't think any of us are naive. When you bring together people at a table, you're bringing murderers, scoundrels, cheats, and swindlers. That's the way you make peace, not with Mother Teresa, St. Francis, and Gandhi. Always we thought gathering those people was not material support, and by now gathering them, it certainly is a violation of the Patriot Act. I worry, as someone who's more of an analyst and writer than a practitioner anymore, that if I were to write an op-ed for how you engage the ETA or other groups and bring them to the peace table, we're in a situation where that itself is going to be constrained speech. And I wouldn't want to be the first op-ed writer to try to challenge that. I worry if somebody out there uses a manual we wrote on how to begin demobilization of a radical group, that the possession of those manuals will be seen as aiding and abetting and material support. So there's a lot of gray area here, which makes our groups very nervous. I read this fairly directly as constraining U.S. military commanders on the ground in Afghanistan if they want to have Taliban communications and have Taliban lay down their weapons. Are we going to say that that captain or lieutenant in charge of a division provided material support for terrorists at our time of national crisis? No, we're going to say they're engaged in trying to end the war. Well, the same is true in Colombia, on the West Bank, and a variety of other areas. If you look at the reach of this, we would have never have formed an agreement in Northern Ireland and George Mitchell would be in jail. If you looked at the reach of this, we never would have been able to reform the thinking of the Nepalese to move in from the field, to move to the ballot box. It's probably even fair to say that the South African agreement couldn't have been forged because there could have been no dialogue between American conflict resolution specialists and the ANC. So I think we have to have a real dose of realism enter the constitutional debate here and say it's 2010, thank you. It's not 2001. What are the national security needs that are legitimate with regard to provision of resources of a real material kind, and how does that differentiate from First Amendment dialogue in its most narrow sense? Well, it's no secret that a lot of the conflict and some of the inspiration for terrorist acts in a number of countries has certain kinds of religious roots. So take, for example, a situation like the Philippines, where a number of very fine international organizations, from Catholic Relief Services to Court Aid in Europe to a variety of other groups, are engaged in a dialogue among Christian and Muslim groups about internal peace in Mindanao and elsewhere. One of the effects on church groups here is that willingness to use religion as a basis to bring all of us to the table, whatever our prior actions, and to serve as a neutralizer where we can have active dialogue now, we're stripped of that, simply because that faction, which is associated or labeled by people as part of Abu Sayyaf or the Moro group, is now not permitted at the table, or they can come to the table alone and we're not permitted there to assist in dialogue with them. So if you look at 80% of the conflicts that are around the globe right now, they have some version of strong religious actors attached to them. even if it's a strongly differentiated group that has a militant wing versus a kind of Sinn Féin kind of wing. The greatest adverse impact here is that our ethic to go anywhere under almost any condition, to talk with people about peace, has now been significantly compromised. I think, in fact, that's a national security crisis. We have 17 conflicts in which 14 of the critical actors of the 17 are on the terrorist list. So where do we go from here? We either start being much more scrupulous about who gets placed on that list, we talk about the conditions under which people can come off the list, or the Secretary of State, like they do for sanctions kinds of operations, designates some groups, like World Vision, Catholic Relief Services, and others, as being exempt from being charged under this area of the Patriot Act. Or you go the long route, which is you try to introduce a change in the Patriot Act itself in the U.S. Congress.